All right, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net. We're going to look at Joe here from 3X Velocity Camp. Coming out of leg lift, Joe, we can see you're quick to want to turn your back hip down, not really getting into a good linear force vector position. So if I draw this out for you, we want to get up to a more linear position off the back leg, so the hip should be somewhere down here. So keep moving forward and down at the same rate, because this femur is too vertical. So if you're hitting into range here and everything's wanting to go early, then we're going to get early rotation. Everything's just going to be predominantly rotating. So we have to continue to bring the shin down and get more force back into the ground, or more linear force, because if we push force in the ground here, we're going to want to jump. So to be able to push back into the ground, we have to get more linear, and that's continuing to ride that hip forward and down the same rate. You can see you're pulling the trunk really far back against the hip to more than likely keep your hips moving, but it's putting you in a position to over abduct the hip or to cut your load off. So we don't want to lean too far back, because then we will over hyper abduct, or we'll hit into the hip abduction early. We want to just be slightly behind the front hip and really focus on getting the hip to mobilize and load. So from this position, the sequencing is we're going to see it in the sequencing. So because the back leg wasn't fully able to get linear and really drive late into the movement, we're going to see how this is affecting both angular sequencing and linear sequencing. So left is angular, right is linear. And we can see going into front foot strike, as that knee turns down, the hips peak just before front foot, which is fine, but it's just not a lot of power because it went early. And then we see the blue peaking here. The blue line is the lead arm, that's the glove, and it's peaking considerably higher than the green, which is the trunk. So the glove, as you can see, pulling down and pulling across the body is really driving rotation here. It's not what we want. We want the hip driving it, and then the glove and trunk going together. We definitely don't want to see the glove driving and then the trunk losing speed out of it. And we can see that it's a lot of rotation, because when the arm gets to release, if we look on the right in the linear sequencing, the trunk is pretty much shut off. There's no energy pushing forward. So if we had a good linear movement, we'd have just coming out of the green would be just coming out of the peak, and we're well off the peak at this point, where the trunk is literally stops moving forward. And you can see the hip here on the right is the red is peaking after the green. So the green's linear peak was as the glove pulled down and kind of brought it up to a vertical position. Then the hip kicked in as the front foot landed, and then everything just shuts off to pitch release because it's so rotational. And then the other indication it's rotational, you have the arm fully extended, because all the centrifugal force from the glove pulling across the body, and the trunk going into what's called an ipsilateral position here, leaning over the toes, to a contralateral position, so aggressively pulling across the body to create this purely rotational delivery. So this would be the quintessential purely rotational upper body delivery. So, and also too, I mean, you're going to see if we look at the pelvis orientation at pitch release, it's about, let's see, at pitch release about right there. It's about 30 degrees forward bend. High velocity pitcher is going to be more like 45, 50 degrees. Front leg is helping a little bit. It's getting extended, but the trunk's even into over rotation. The trunk should be square to the target at this point, as opposed to completely turning sideways and extending the arm to the target. It should be moving forward at this point. So the improvements need to be going to the drawing board and going back to that initial problem. So cutting the back leg collapsing early forced everything to the hips to rotate early, which doesn't give them a lot of power. So the glove takes over, it pulls aggressively across the body, and then everything just finishes in rotation. So if we can keep the hips moving forward and down the same rate, we can peak more linear power, because now we're carrying more momentum, and then we can separate and not get so ipsilateral and keep the trunk more upright, and then allow it to just catapult all that energy forward. Then we get a good forward trunk. The arm would be in a little more flexion, and we'd have potentially a lot more energy behind the ball, and in healthier posture. So every good thing's going to come out here. Now, there's a lot of work here. It's a lot of work to work on that hip mobility, work on that, say, posterior strength or leg strength, and be able to get used to carrying momentum, timing more momentum through delivery, and then really staying contralateral and transferring that energy to the trunk. It's a big challenge, but you do that, there's a lot of room for improvement on these with all these changes.